We're talking tariffs again because US President Donald Trump has said any country doing business with Iran will face 25% tariffs on its trade with the United States. And this is significant because it's not aimed at one product or company or sector. It's a blanket threat. So if you do business with Iran, you will pay a penalty when you do trade with America. It's a big unknown as to how this will be implemented and whether it sits on top of the existing tariffs. Remember, India pays 50% already, which is among the highest in the world, added to another 25%, that's 75% tariff. And we know the direction is clear. Trump uses tariffs as a geopolitical weapon. Where does that leave India? What trade are we doing with Iran? Can we give it up? What trade are we doing with US? How does it affect our economy? That's what this video is about. So remember, like, share, subscribe, and please sign up for our membership and support the work that we're doing. You will actually be helping us do a better job and give you better sort of output as well. Quickly, why is the US doing it now? Remember, Iran is under a lot of pressure. It is currently experiencing major protests triggered by an economic collapse from mismanagement. There's been a sharp fall in their currency, soaring inflation. People are in distress and deep public anger, specifically against the religious leaders in Iran. Also, at the same time, while the protests are escalating in Tehran, and Trump has been signaling to Iran very clearly that you will be punished if you're found to be attacking your own protesters. There is information coming out that at least 650 people have died in these protests. The number might actually be much larger than that because independent agencies are finding it difficult at this point to verify these numbers. But right now, the tariffs that we're talking about is not just about commerce, it's about strategic pressure. Let's take a look at India now. Why does this matter to India? Because it puts India in a really tight spot. India has a long-standing relationship with Iran. Now, before 2019, Iran was a major energy partner for India. We bought a lot of our crude oil from Iran, but US sanctions tightened and India stopped buying oil from Iran. It took us some time. Remember, we asked Iran for like a grace period of 6 odd months, saying allow us some time to wean ourselves off it because it will affect prices for our citizens. And the US gave us that time, but then eventually we were asked to give up Iranian oil altogether, which we did, and we replaced it with oil from other countries. So then you'd be thinking, if we're not buying crude oil, why is it such a big deal to India? I'll tell you. India's relationship with Iran is not just about trade. It's about access. It's about strategic geography, influence over West Asia, and balancing against Pakistan and China. Iran is one of those rare countries that gives India direct geographic bridge into regions that India really cares about without having to go through Pakistan. I'll explain what that means. Now, there's a port in Iran called the Chabahar port. If I'm mispronouncing it, say so in the comments. It's in southeastern Iran. It's off the Gulf of Oman. And its location is strategic because it sits in a critical maritime checkpoint where a huge portion of the world's oil shipping passes. What is India doing there? India is developing and operating that port, specifically that terminal. Now, this gives India a long-term strategic presence in that region. It gives us an economic foothold, a logistical foothold, political leverage in that region as well. Also, a very interesting space for us. Remember, if we want to do trade with Afghanistan and the Central Asian region by land, we have to go through Pakistan, through Afghanistan into Central Asia. Pakistan blocked India's access decades ago. So what the Chabahar port allows India to do is to use the sea route into Iran and then from there use the land route into Afghanistan and Central Asia. So it gives us access to the Afghan market, the Central Asian resources, and regional trade. And that is why this port is sort of a gateway to Central Asia for Iran, for India, where we do a lot of trade. The regional connectivity also helps us not just do the trade, but gives us power. We're creating dependence on us. We're shaping trade corridors. We're building influence. And all of this puts us in a very important position when it comes to trade in Central Asia. And it gives us a West Asia influence. Iran is important because India's West Asia relationships are also complex. Remember, we have to manage ties with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Qatar, with Iraq. All of these countries have different competing interests competing to each other, but India has to manage options with all of them. And this presence is important to us. India has millions of Indians working and living in West Asia, and it's important to us not just in terms of our economy, but also in keeping our people safe, energy security, maritime trade. So we want influence in those countries and in that area. Also, the Chabahar port is a counter to China. China uses Pakistan. So while China is using Pakistan as part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, Iran gives India an answer to that, and we are able to also use Iran to sort of balance out that power. What changes now with Trump's threat? Now, the US tariff threat becomes a pressure point if the US has obviously said anyone doing business with Iran will be punished. India faces a dilemma. Key strategic power projects like Chabahar will be at risk. If you continue with this project, you will risk US economic penalties. And if you step back from Iran, then you lose that strategic and access influence. And that means, this will have important consequences, and India will have to make those choices. Let's take a look at what that consequence is. So let's assume India decided to brave the tariff with the US. India-Iran trade right now is $1.6 billion as of FY 24-25. And India-US trade is $212.3 billion in that same financial year. So obviously, it's more than 125 times larger than the India-Iran trade. So if you weigh the two together, it will seem like US is far more important economically to India. It's one of India's biggest export engines. And so, just to put it in one sentence, we are, the tariff escalation with Iran, would we be risking a 1.68 billion worth of commerce for a 212 billion dollar worth of commerce with the US? And that is really the question that India will have to answer at this point. So not just the geopolitical strategic presence that Iran allows India in that neighborhood, but if you measure the money, it's actually quite an obvious decision. Let's take a look at what kind of business India does with Iran. Now, while, like I said, oil has shrunk rapidly, India still exports basmati rice. Apparently, Iran is one of our major markets for basmati rice, tea, sugar, pharmaceuticals, organic chemicals, pulses, fruits, and meat products. I beg your pardon. India imports from Iran petroleum, bitumen, liquefied propane, apples, dates, and chemicals. So the import list is not so big. The export list is interesting specifically for rice. Rice is for two reasons. One, like I said, Iran is a key market for Indian basmati rice. And if that market shuts down, it will affect payment cycles, shipment, exporter confidence, and of course, those who are exporting from India. Indian rice is also sold in the US, and even though tariffs have been brought on it, the Indian rice market continues to have a very loyal customer base in the US, and the diaspora has very strong demand for Indian basmati rice. So the importers have actually absorbed some of that cost, and the exporters have compressed their margins. So effectively, this has actually happened across the board. So one of the questions we'll ask is, how has India coped with the 50% tariff that we're already dealing with? That's because it's sort of being shared and the margins have squeezed a bit, but the trade continues because it's such an important market. So also the big chunk of what India exports to the US comes outside of the tariff because these are core supply chain goods. They're not nice to have. They're really important to have. Pharmaceuticals, for example, generics specifically, the US market wants those. Specialty chemicals, engineering goods, textiles and garments, and IT-enabled services. IT and pharmaceuticals are left out of the tariff. Textiles has taken a big beating. Also, India has a really strong price advantage, low production cost in India, the scale at which we are producing pharma, textiles, rice. That means that even if they have reduced the margin, they're still able to make sense of it. And like I said, the cost is being shared by the US importer, by the customer who's paying a higher price in the US, by the Indian exporters, and of course by the manufacturers as well. And India has apparently also pushed to open up West Asia, Africa, Europe, and ASEAN markets for our products. So like I said, the tariffs have not killed just the exporters, they've killed the margins. And so with a lower investment and a tighter working capital, people are making it work. But an additional tariff of another 25% is going to hurt even further, because what happens is basically it puts India into this lot of risky supplier space where the people you are buying from are constantly constantly having to renegotiate prices, shorter contracts, payment cycles. Everything becomes unreliable in some ways. And that pain lands unevenly on smaller businesses. So smaller exporters actually get hurt more because smaller exporters cannot absorb that pain. The bigger players become bigger, the smaller players get squeezed out. So, what does surviving the tariffs actually mean? If the US market still really wants that particular item, then they're willing to pay a higher price for it. Profits are still getting squeezed, and another 25% could really, really hurt at this point. So the tariff stacks up in this manner. We know that our trade agreement with the US is stuck. We don't know what has happened to it. We've not got an update on it. And India is left right now making some really tough choices. The Iran trade is small. Are we willing to give it up? Because it's also strategically important. The US trade is huge and economically critical. I also want to point out the GDP growth numbers that came out recently suggested that India's GDP growth has continued in spite of the tariffs. We continue to be growing at a really healthy sort of pace. Where does this leave India in this decision that they're going to have to make at this point with Iran? Remember, there's already the decision with Russia that is pending to do with oil. And now Iran is going to have to do with the port specifically that I was talking about. Leave me a comment in the comment section on what you believe, or what is your review of Trump's method of geopolitical sort of pressure that he's putting on all countries in the world, and what do you think India should be doing?